Dyatlov Pass happened in Russia, but something eerily similar unfolded in America. In 1978, deep in the mountains of California, the mysterious disappearance of 5 young men gave birth to a chilling name whispered by investigators and true crime researchers alike: the American Dyatlov Pass. There were no signs of violence, no clear motive, no obvious reason for what happened next. Only silence, snow, and a truth that still refuses to surface. On the evening of February 24, 1978, 5 friends, Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Ted Weiher, and Jackie Hewitt, attended a college basketball game at California State University in Chico. They were not thrill seekers, not criminals, not adventurers looking for danger. They were simply excited about a game. The next morning, they were supposed to play in their own Special Olympics basketball tournament, and by all accounts, they were looking forward to it. Family members later said they laid out their uniforms before leaving home, careful and eager, like children preparing for Christmas morning. The game ended around 10 p.m., and witnesses saw the 5 men stop at a convenience store in Chico shortly afterward. Receipts confirmed they bought snacks, candy bars, soda, milk, ordinary purchases on an ordinary night. Then they began the drive home toward Yuba City. It should have been a simple, straight route along Highway 99. Instead, sometime after 11 p.m., their red 1969 Mercury Montego turned east, away from home, climbing into the dark, winding roads of the Sierra Nevada mountains. Why they turned that way has never been answered. Nearly 4 days later, after families reported them missing, a forest ranger discovered their car abandoned on a remote mountain road near Oroville, more than 70 miles from where they were supposed to be. The car was not crashed. It was not damaged. It was gently stuck in a patch of snow, but investigators later determined it could have easily been pushed free. The keys were missing. The windows were rolled up. The doors were unlocked. Inside, the snack wrappers were still there. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood. No broken glass. Nothing to suggest panic. It was as if the 5 men had simply stepped out and vanished into the freezing wilderness. That night, temperatures in the mountains dropped below freezing. Snowstorms swept through the region. The area was rugged, steep, and unfamiliar to them. None of the men were dressed for mountain survival. They wore light jackets and casual clothing. Some did not even have heavy boots. Search teams scoured the area for weeks, but heavy snowfall made rescue efforts nearly impossible. Then came the strange testimony of a man named Joseph Shans. On the same night the 5 disappeared, Shans claimed he had suffered a mild heart attack while driving his car up that same mountain road. He said he saw headlights behind him and later observed a group of people, including what he believed was a woman holding a baby, standing near a vehicle. He called out for help, but the lights went out. Later, he claimed he saw flashlights moving in the darkness. His story was inconsistent and changed under questioning, and investigators were never able to confirm whether he had truly seen the 5 men or someone else entirely. When spring finally melted the snow in June 1978, a group of motorcyclists stumbled upon a grisly discovery nearly 19 miles from where the car had been abandoned. Hidden deep in the Plumas National Forest, they found a Forest Service trailer. Inside lay the remains of Ted Weiher. He was on a bed, wrapped tightly in sheets from head to toe. His beard had grown long. He had lost nearly half his body weight. The autopsy later revealed he had survived for approximately 8 to 13 weeks after the disappearance. 8 to 13 weeks in the freezing wilderness. Even more disturbing was what investigators found inside the trailer: a large supply of military rations, enough to feed the group for months. There were canned goods, dehydrated meals, matches, and a propane heating system connected to an external fuel tank. But the heating system had never been turned on. The rations had barely been touched. Ted had starved to death slowly, despite being surrounded by food. His feet were severely frostbitten, and his shoes were missing. Later examination revealed that someone else had likely taken his shoes. Near the trailer, searchers found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, their bodies lying in the snow along the path that led back toward the car. They had died of hypothermia. One was missing his shoes. The other had wrapped his feet in cloth, possibly in a desperate attempt to stay warm. Jackie Hewitt's backbone was discovered miles away, partially scattered by animals. His skull was never found. And Gary Mathias, the only member of the group without an intellectual disability, a former U.S. Army soldier with survival training, was never found at all. No remains, no clothing, no trace. His disappearance remains one of the most haunting aspects of the case. Why had they driven into the mountains? Why leave a functional car? Why walk 19 miles uphill through snow to a remote trailer they likely did not know existed? And if they reached shelter, why not light the heater? Why not open the food supplies properly? Why did Ted remain inside while others left? The official conclusion ruled the deaths as exposure and hypothermia, but it answered almost nothing about the chain of decisions that led them there. Some investigators theorized that Gary Mathias may have been experiencing a psychiatric episode. He had a history of schizophrenia and had been prescribed medication which he did not have with him. Could paranoia have driven the group into the mountains? Could he have convinced them they were in danger? Others suggest they may have encountered something on the road. Another vehicle, strangers, or even perceived threats that caused them to flee on foot. The witness account of a woman and baby has never been explained, nor have reports of other vehicles in the area that night. What makes the Yuba County Five case so disturbingly similar to Dyatlov Pass is not just the freezing conditions, but the irrational behavior. At Dyatlov, hikers cut their way out of a tent into sub-zero temperatures for reasons unknown. In California, 5 men abandoned a working car and walked into a snowbound forest without proper clothing, ignoring food and heat that could have saved them. In both cases, investigators were left with physical evidence that contradicted common sense. Families of the victims struggled for decades with unanswered questions. They described the men as gentle, routine-oriented, unlikely to deviate from plans. The basketball tournament the next morning was important to them. They would not have willingly missed it. And yet something happened on that drive home. Something changed their course. Theories range from accidental misdirection to foul play, to secret drug operations in the mountains that they may have stumbled upon. Some believe they were chased. Others believe they were following someone they trusted. There were reports of organized crime activity and illegal marijuana farms in remote Sierra areas during the late 1970s. Did they witness something they should not have seen? Did fear drive them into the wilderness? The evidence remains silent. The Montego itself provided few clues. Investigators determined it had not run out of gas. It was not mechanically disabled. Snow was present, but not enough to fully immobilize the vehicle at the time it was abandoned. One theory suggests they became stuck temporarily and, fearing further entrapment, chose to seek help on foot. But that does not explain walking uphill in the opposite direction of nearby towns. Nor does it explain bypassing multiple cabins and shelters closer than the trailer they eventually reached. And then there is Gary Mathias, the missing man. Some speculate he may have survived longer than the others. His army jacket was found in the trailer. His tennis shoes were found near Ted's body. If he removed his shoes and left the trailer, where did he go? Did he attempt to seek help? Did he become lost? Or did something else happen entirely? Over the years, amateur investigators and true crime enthusiasts have revisited the case, mapping distances, retracing routes, analyzing weather reports from 1978. The consensus remains unsettling. The decisions made that night defy logic. Even accounting for fear, confusion, or mild cognitive impairment among some members, the chain of events seems guided by something unseen. A panic, a perceived threat, or a tragic misunderstanding amplified by darkness and snow. In interviews years later, search and rescue members admitted the scene felt wrong. Not violent, not chaotic, just wrong. As if something critical was missing from the story. The Yuba County Five were not experienced outdoorsmen. They were not equipped for winter mountain travel. Yet they walked nearly 20 miles through treacherous terrain. One by one, they succumbed to cold and starvation. And still, the biggest question remains unanswered. What made them leave the safety of their car in the first place? The mountains of the Sierra Nevada are vast and indifferent. In winter, they swallow sound. They erase footprints. They bury secrets beneath layers of snow. In 1978, they buried 5 lives and left behind a mystery that, decades later, continues to disturb anyone who studies it. Because this was not just a tragic accident. It was a sequence of choices that makes no sense. And somewhere between Chico and that lonely forest trailer lies the missing piece, the moment where everything shifted from normal to nightmare. Whatever happened on that road that night did not leave behind fingerprints or a confession. It left silence. And sometimes, silence is far more frightening than any clear answer. The deeper investigators looked into the Yuba County Five, the more the timeline began to feel like a puzzle with missing pieces, as though certain moments had been erased by the snow itself. After the discovery of Ted Weiher's body inside the Forest Service trailer, authorities attempted to reconstruct the group's final movements, calculating distance, elevation, and the brutal winter conditions that defined the Sierra Nevada that February, and what they found only intensified the mystery, because from the location of the abandoned Mercury Montego to the trailer where Ted was found, the journey measured nearly 19 miles along a winding, uphill forest road, a road that in places narrowed to little more than a single lane carved into steep mountain terrain, and to reach that trailer on foot in freezing temperatures, with snow accumulating and limited visibility, would have required determination, direction, and endurance that none of the men were believed to possess in such extreme circumstances, especially considering that at least 4 of them had mild intellectual disabilities and were known for relying heavily on routine and familiarity. Yet somehow they pressed forward into darkness rather than turning back toward lower elevation where help was more likely. Weather reports from February 24th and the days immediately after indicate temperatures dropping well below freezing at night, with intermittent snowstorms sweeping across the higher elevations, reducing visibility and deepening snow cover, and hypothermia in such conditions can set in within hours, particularly for individuals not dressed in insulated gear. So the fact that Ted Weiher survived for weeks inside that trailer suggests that at least one of the men understood the importance of shelter, and perhaps rationing, yet strangely, the trailer's heating system was never activated despite clear instructions posted on the wall explaining how to operate it. And the propane tank outside was full, meaning heat had been available if only someone had turned the valve and lit the system. And this single detail has haunted investigators for decades because it suggests either confusion, fear of doing something wrong, mechanical ignorance, or the possibility that whoever was strongest mentally or physically was no longer present to guide the others. Gary Mathias remains central to this theory as the only member of the group without cognitive impairment and the only one with formal military training. He had served in the U.S. Army and reportedly possessed survival knowledge, though he also had a history of schizophrenia and episodes of erratic behavior when not properly medicated, and records indicate he did not bring his medication with him that night, leading some to theorize that he may have experienced paranoia or delusional thinking during the drive home, perhaps convincing the others that they were in danger or that someone was pursuing them, which could explain the sudden turn into the mountains and the abandonment of the vehicle. Yet this explanation, while plausible on the surface, fails to fully account for the coordinated movement of all 5 men over such a long distance, because if Mathias had panicked alone, the others might have resisted or turned back, unless they trusted him completely or were equally frightened by something unseen. The witness account from Joseph Shans continues to cast a strange shadow over the case, because although his statements were inconsistent, he insisted that he saw another group of people in the mountains that same night, possibly including a woman and child, and reported seeing flashlights moving in the dark. And while investigators could not verify his claims, it remains unsettling that headlights were reportedly visible in an area where the 5 men's car was later found, raising the possibility that another vehicle or individuals were present. And in the late 1970s, the remote regions of the Sierra Nevada were known for illicit marijuana cultivation and isolated encampments, leading some to speculate that the 5 men may have inadvertently stumbled upon criminal activity, been threatened, and fled on foot in confusion and fear, yet no evidence of confrontation, gunfire, or struggle was ever discovered at the vehicle site, leaving this theory suspended in uncertainty. Forensic analysis of the bodies revealed no signs of violence, no broken bones beyond what could be attributed to exposure and wildlife activity, and no defensive wounds, reinforcing the official conclusion of death by hypothermia and starvation. But official conclusions often satisfy paperwork more than they satisfy the human instinct for explanation, because they do not answer why Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling were found along the path between the trailer and the car, as though attempting to return downhill, suggesting that perhaps they realized shelter existed elsewhere or that supplies were insufficient. And if that is true, why did Ted remain behind wrapped tightly in sheets, positioned carefully on a bed as if someone had intentionally cared for him before leaving, an act that implies compassion and planning rather than chaotic panic? Some researchers believe the group may have initially become disoriented after taking a wrong turn, perhaps following Highway 162 east instead of heading south toward home, and once snow thickened and the road narrowed, fear of sliding off the mountain may have led them to stop, exit the vehicle, and attempt to find help on foot, believing civilization was closer than it actually was. But maps from the era indicate that several towns were in the opposite direction, downhill rather than uphill, making their chosen path counterintuitive unless visibility was severely compromised or they misinterpreted road signs in the dark. Another layer of complexity emerges when considering group psychology, because individuals in cohesive groups often defer to perceived leaders during crises, and if Matthias assumed that role, whether rationally or irrationally, the others may have followed without question, particularly if they believed immediate danger existed behind them rather than ahead. And snow at night can distort sound, absorb light, and create an atmosphere of profound isolation that magnifies fear. So even a minor mechanical concern or distant noise could have triggered collective anxiety. The missing body of Gary Matthias remains the case's most disturbing element, because despite extensive searches over months and years, no skeletal remains conclusively identified as his were ever recovered, and while wildlife scavenging and environmental exposure can disperse remains beyond recognition, the total absence of confirmed evidence fuels speculation that he may have survived longer, wandered farther, or encountered another fate entirely, perhaps succumbing to exposure in a ravine yet to be discovered, or hypothetically being picked up by a passing vehicle, though no credible sightings ever emerged. Families of the victims maintained that the men were unlikely to willingly skip their tournament, emphasizing how structured and predictable their routines were, and that emotional investment adds weight to the idea that something external disrupted their plans rather than an internal decision to explore the mountain spontaneously. Yet decades later, the terrain has changed, memories have faded, and potential witnesses may no longer be alive, leaving only archived reports and fading photographs of a red Montego sitting silently against a wall of snow. Comparisons to the Dyatlov Pass incident continue not because of identical circumstances but because of shared absurdity, the way both cases present evidence that contradicts expected survival behavior, the abandonment of viable shelter, the movement into harsher conditions, and the lingering sense that a critical event occurred just beyond the reach of documentation. Modern true crime analysts using satellite imagery and digital elevation models have retraced the route, calculating that in clear daylight the journey from car to trailer would have taken several hours even without snow, meaning the men likely walked through most of the night, and exhaustion combined with hypothermia impairs judgment rapidly, causing apathy and confusion, which may explain why available food and heat went unused. Because cognitive decline from prolonged cold can reduce problem-solving ability to childlike levels, and in that state, turning on a heater or opening sealed rations may have seemed overwhelming. Still, the image of a man starving beside untouched supplies remains difficult to accept purely as cognitive failure, and so the case endures in podcasts, documentaries, and online forums as a symbol of unresolved tragedy, not because of supernatural elements, but because of the haunting simplicity of its unanswered question. What happened on that road that night to alter the direction of 5 lives so completely? Perhaps the truth is less dramatic than theories suggest, perhaps a wrong turn compounded by pride, fear, and deteriorating weather created a cascading chain of poor decisions, each one logical in the moment but catastrophic in sequence, and perhaps the mountains need no villain, only indifference, because nature does not require motive to be deadly. Yet even that explanation leaves behind emotional residue, the sense that something more specific, more tangible, should exist at the center of the story. In the end, the Yuba County Five remained suspended between accident and enigma, their final hours reconstructed only through fragments, footprints long melted away, voices never recorded, their story carried forward by those who refused to let the silence remain absolute, and like the snow that once covered their path, the mystery persists, quiet, cold, and unresolved. A reminder that sometimes the most unsettling cases are not those with violence or spectacle, but those where ordinary people step slightly off course and are swallowed by circumstances that no one fully understands, leaving behind a question that echoes through the years. If they could have simply turned around, why didn't they, and what unseen moment convinced them that forward into the dark was safer than back toward home?